director while we're on the hunt for someone to replace me. Who don't know me. We are excited to be celebrating Historic Preservation Month this month. Of course, goes along with that theme, but I want to make sure that you have a chance to go up before you leave today and see a selection of the DNR's Division of Historic Archaeology, a photo contest every year. Images from our gallery on the second floor that are really interesting to see and will make you want to take a little road trip and find. So be sure you see that today. I'll let you know the fun day coming up, 15th, which is a Saturday. So if you have kids or grandkids or are just interested in life and nature yourself, feel free to come down. That'll be from 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock. And then our next History Hunters program will be about track, and Wes Wingert will be presenting that. So he was speaking about his. He gave that presentation a little while ago. So he's an excellent speaker for those of you who saw that. In the back on the table, I have these cards, and for this year would have been Gene Stratton's 150th birthday. So we are having celebration all throughout the month. Every weekend, pretty much, they're going on. So dates are on the find that 17th of August. So we have quite a lineup for August. So I hope you check that out. But for those that don't, it's a great way to support the museum, and of course you get into events like this. We are happy to have Todd Zeiger. He earned a degree in historic preservation from Williams, Rhode Island, and he's the director of the Northern Regional Office of Indiana Landmarks, an organization fighting to defend architecturally, historically significant, and community property. His covers 25 counties in northern Indiana. Travels 25,000 to 30,000 miles a year. But here today. So if you join me in welcoming Todd Zeiger.
Thank you for the introduction. Listen when you're introduced to figure out what you do for a living. Sometimes I forget. So, quick question: how many members of the parks? The back 3. Good. You 4. Whew. You all can leave afterwards. Lock those doors. That's why we do these in confined spaces. So yeah, we're going to talk about sleuthing out the history of your vintage home. So actively working on figuring out the research of your old house right now. A couple of you are too. All right. Question: are there any specific questions that you're trying to get to that I want to make sure while I'm in here? Things where you're stuck or areas that you're wanting to make sure today knowing about. So if you just give that some towards the end. Question and answer as well, and so we'll kind of. So yeah, thanks for coming out. I got a time talk, and at 1 o'clock they boot us out, make us go back or make you go back to work or something. I don't know. Across this little book one time, Inventory of Historic Research. Wouldn't that like just go down side or pull that out? Just like okay, well on page 2 it just gives you like a list of every place you can look to find. I can tell you that doesn't really exist. And so what I want to do today is a couple things for you. Ways that you can find some history of your house. I'm going to talk about architecture as a way that you can figure out the history of your home and give you some clues. And we'll talk about the dusty old bookway and method of research as well. But I'm going to talk about just different ways that maybe you haven't thought about to look and figure out the history of your old house. Because the dusty old books, I look through them and the smell of the old leather. Really much old, so that's all good. But I think sometimes we use different tools. So that's basically what I'm going to cover. Lots of time to answer questions as well. Just a really quick commercial about Indiana Landmarks. We're a group of we're a not-for-profit. You heard our mission a little bit earlier. Basically, we exist to save historic communities, and that happens a variety of ways. Of course, we have a website, indianalandmarks.org. Our headquarters in Indianapolis. If you zoom through Indy on 65 going east-west, you look over to the south side there, you've seen this tower maybe sticking up. That's our new headquarters we just moved into after a restoration, repurposing. And I'll show you this slide just to let you know that's really what we are. We're not a whole lot about museums. We're a whole lot about repurposing historic properties for new uses, economic purposes, keeping them functional, finding new ways to use them. And our headquarters, and I'll show you some of our other offices, help us tell repurposed old Methodist church that was certainly on the edge of being demolished. And now it's an event center and our offices, and we bring folks in. And I mean, one of the most difficult to reuse buildings is our churches, because people think you can't do anything else with them. And as they go empty, they tend to sit. And really, there's lots of opportunity. And we have conferences here, we do workshops, and certainly this is larger, but you can do that on a smaller scale of business. So certainly welcome to stop. It's on Central Avenue at 65 in Indianapolis is where we hang out. I more than a third of the here, so that puts Wabash in my region. So if you have a need for your house, you some help on how to research it, or talk about restoration, or you have them in buildings in danger, we're certainly help. I mentioned I brought some examples of our magazine. I'll pass those out later in my speech to each of you. If I pass them out now, you won't listen to me because you'll be reading our magazine, and then you won't learn anything. And we do an e-letter. If you give us your email, we do an e-letter once a month. So let's try to get our arms around this big cheese of raising a house. And really, this has nothing to do with anything other than I just like this picture of holding hands around the big chocolate cheese. I have no idea why they were doing that, but obviously they were happy. So this comes to mind sometimes, right? When you're in your old house, you're sitting in a room and you're looking at a book, and you got a bunch of other books around you, and you're trying to figure out what the heck the history of your house was. And I'm going to talk about some of those resources you can use when you're doing research on your old house, and certainly they're available in your community. And we'll talk about that on the latter half of this afternoon. But I love old books, and they're fun once you get into them. You can figure out how to read the cursive writing. But let's talk about other tools we can use to figure out the history of our old house. Certainly one of the best ways, and these are really simple this morning, it's really hard to figure out what I'm going to talk about. We could use our eyes, right? If you ever think about that, if you're trying to figure out the research, figure out the history of your old house, don't overlook the obvious, literally and figuratively. You can use your eyes. I'm going to talk a lot about that today, of how you look at books or being really detailed about stuff. You can just look at your house and it will tell you things. The camera, you can use research. You can be taking pictures of things around your house you notice could change. But you can also, of course, use photographs. Those are a gold mine, obviously, if you can find a little of your in it. What old picture might help you? Well, the cars are a great way, right? You're looking at the picture, you can say, okay, well, that's around the turn of the century, maybe a little after, because of the cars. Now, you can date it usually by the newest car in the picture. It's not going to be any newer than that. So, they'll tell you that. You can look around. Maybe it won't be a picture of your house, a picture of a house next door or down the street, so it might give you some clues there. So, photography is great. Clothing might be something as well. I'll come back to that. How about a hammer? How many people think you can use a hammer when you're doing research on your old house? Captain Obvious is yes, you can. And I'll talk about that as well. How about a bulldozer? Probably not. Although archaeologically, you wouldn't want to use it. You certainly use it. Well, the thing about old houses is they will tell you their stories. They'll tell you their secrets if you kind of pay attention. Use the different things that I just went through. They will tell you what the story is. They'll give you that story of their life, of the life of that house. If you kind of pay attention to it, it will kind of whisper in your ear about that. I'm going to give you a few pictures about that in a moment. Let's just talk about some baby steps. We'll walk through real quick some different steps that I like when I'm looking at researching an old house or trying to help somebody through. So the first thing is be familiar with your house when you're doing research, because those will show up as you're doing research. You can use those to match, because no one piece of information is maybe going to be definitive, right? So you maybe take a clue, you write that down, oh, such and such, or I talked to Jim down there, told me these things, and then you look at your house, and maybe notice some changes. So you can always take these little pieces of information and link them together to look at this house. One of the big things I like to help you with is utilizing the style of your house to narrow down the date, the primary date of construction. Styles are a really easy way to figure out about when your house was built, or maybe when changes were made to it. So you can take a note of those changes. If you take a look at what maybe the primary style of that house is, and maybe look at ways that the house has been changed, that will help over time. So these are just general baby steps. Anybody have their house? Well, that's awesome. You guys can go home, just go home, read your abstract, you'll be done. So good for you. The rest of us, we have to suffer through the rest of this, because basically what an abstract is, if you don't know that, it's essentially a compilation of everything that happened to that property since the first created as a property. So all the way back to the land grant times. Usually we'll even have mentions to the Americans when it was grand. The abstracts are kind of the Bible of that house or that property, and they are amazing. And I'll come back to those. So read your abstract. They are a key. Your life is much easier. You'd be surprised how many times I talk to somebody and they're researching a house, maybe not where they live, but they don't have the address. You might want to have that handy when you're doing the research on the house. That's handy, just because it might come up. You'd be surprised sometimes people don't. Partial numbers and key numbers, or tax key numbers, of course, are nothing, something else you'll want to have with you when you get into the book research in the county library or the county records. Some records are by tax number or parcel number, some are by address. So you kind of have to have both of those numbers, both that pieces of information, because you never know when they're going to come up. And today, no talk is ever done without mentioning computer. And I can tell you it's rapidly changing. There is more and more and more online, including genealogical information, but also just information about transfers of property through the county records, etc. Make your life easy if you can search from home, see if you can tap into your county's database or get access that way through either home internet, or if you go down to the county, what they'll let you search on records. And I'll come back to granted. So reading a building, what do I mean by that? Well, you can know and utilize styles of properties I mentioned. You know those particular popular styles of the time, you can really narrow down a house was built. Change how you drive around your community, so just curse me now because you will never look at your neighborhood again the same way. Children have told me that they drive around and look at old buildings now and they remember the style, so it's good. Story, right? If you know your styles, you can really start to read that neighborhood. Shadow lines. Shadow lines are well, if you have a brick building and had something attached to the outside at one point, you got it painted all around, you take that something off, your shadow line. Or if there was a piece of molding on the wall on the inside, you got point that was. Well, shadow lines really read out how a house was changed. So paying attention to layers, etc. So we're about how we perceive things. So when you look at this, about what era this was last year, about what period of time are we talking about when we look at this fancy woman? Just shout it out. Small.
1850.
1850? Probably a little bit later, but good. You're in the right century. That's a good thing. Probably a little bit later, Victorian. Look at that. Well, of course, this lady is not from 1983 because she doesn't have like I don't know, one period. How about this? What period should she be from? You'd probably be from the 20s, right? You look at that. Well, of course, she's not from the 1970s because then she'd have like. She's from the 1920s, right? You look at that. How about this couple? Probably towards that turn of the century. Not this early Victorian dress you saw. Not quite. Some kind of in between, right? So you have both the women's and men's styles. So just keep that go forward. So what is in vogue style-wise? Also, they did the same thing with houses, right? So usually I have to do like clothing for the women, and then because guys like cars. So if you look at the car, right? About what year would this car be? Give or take. Just for, you know,
1900.
1900, maybe a little later. Ford model, early Ford. Exactly. You look at that car and go, well, of course, it's turn of the century. It's not a 1960s car. It's from 19 whatever, 03, 04. How about that one? One of my favorite cars ever. 1959 Black Eldorado Brits with the convertible. Right? Of course, that's the year. How about that one? A little more modern. Probably about 2000, maybe 2005. I can't remember when Priuses were invented. What would happen though if you had the Ford and somebody had put on the fender of the would you be able to figure that out? You kind of look at it and go, wow, look at that. Sometime in the 1950s they put that fender on this Model T car, right? Kind of jump out at you. So let's talk about dogs. You thought you were here to learn about houses today, weren't you? Well, I'm tired of talking about houses. So let's talk about dogs. What dog is this? Collie or Sheltie, because it's a small version. Purebred, hard dog, it's a collie, of course, right? How about this one? English bulldog, right? As you look at those, of course, that's what those dogs are. How about this one? Anybody know what this dog is? A Labradoodle, something like that, I think. What does that have to do with architecture? Well, sometimes we have houses that are purebreds,
And you look at it and go, well, it's shelter here. Of course it's a Queen Anne style house. Of course it's a bungalow. It's purebred. It's out of the textbook from that. And that's awesome, and we can use those styles to help you figure out dates. But most of the time, they're kind of mutts. And you look at them, and you go, wow, look at that. It's got like one style from one period, and it has another style from another period. Mutt dogs, right? Because you look at it and you kind of scratch your head like, what the heck are they doing with this dog? It's got like the head of a, I don't know, German Shepherd, and then a body of, I don't know what else, Corgi. So yeah, I've got lots of dog lovers in the audience, right? Usually I hate those three things, dogs, cars, or clothes. So sometimes you look at your house and you think, what the heck were they thinking, right? And that just happens over time. Keep in mind, built the house, they were building something that was in style and vogue, like the clothes, like the car. So it's going to have a look. They wanted to keep up with the Joneses. People then, than they are today. I mean, I love what we were just talking about the wall and shop around the town. People were people who wanted to keep up with the neighbors. They didn't want to build a style that was out of fashion, right? Use that information when looking at your house to help put a date. And we'll talk about those dates here. So they had they could look at. They could buy plans, they could hire a carpenter, they could walk up and down the street and look what the neighbor built on a house. But where the mutt dog thing comes in is they did just like we like that house, but I want you to do this thing over here onto it as well, or I want that room moved around, or I want this porch. So you end up with these kind of combinations. So we can start with the purebred house, we can start with those style guides, and then we can go from there trying to figure out all the way through. You can find these guides from the turn of the century all the way through the 20s, 70s. Finding copies of these and about the period of time does a couple of things. Help you narrow the date. Also help you figure out maybe how your house was changed. A photograph might look like, floor plan, how it might have been laid out, etc. So let's talk about dates. See, now we're into food. You gotta know your dates, right? So when you're doing research on your house, know your dates. Have a general of your house, of the neighborhood you're in, or the state you're from. State, if you want to go. Because if you're living in Wabash, Indiana, if you know that you have a canal era history, then you're going to know that you're going to go to the mid-19th century, right? Or maybe a little bit earlier. Well, in some communities that don't have that, they're find houses from the mid-19th century, so they're not going to mind why look there in your books, right? So if you know the settlement goes through, you're going to know that Indiana didn't really start to get heavy until that early 1800s, probably, right? As you get up along Wabash, that canal era. So if you're researching your house, it's not going to do you any good if you're looking for records from the 1700s because your house probably didn't exist then, right? So knowing your dates of your neighborhood or of your city, narrow that down. You can just see as that map populates, and you know your as it comes back and we move east to west. Well, knowing your dates also helps you because people moved from west as they were settling, correct? So they would bring the memory of their architecture and what they built with them. And so we'll have architecture that are later that you're going to find on the East Coast. So maybe we'll find a federal house here, 1850, well, 1750 out east, because people moved, they brought their memories with them. And so know your dates, know your general history as you're researching your house. It'll time to not look where you're not information to help you narrow that down. So I'm going to give you examples of that. So here we have on the upper left the Huddleston Farmhouse and Museum. Dating to the mid-19th century. It's a federal style house. Narrow that down. In the 1900s, it looks like a federal style house. We know that period. It's about the mid-1800s. It was an inn on the National Road, so we knew the history of the National Roads. That helps us narrow down. They would stay in the lower level. The visitors would stay on the lower level. You can see the lower level, and people would live there, lived upstairs with their oxen in their cars. So it helps us. We know it's a federal style house. You can start to narrow it down by that style. The other thing about old houses that I love is that they always have these layers, right? It's pretty rare to find that purebred house that was built in 1882 and never changed. You know, there's always been changes of history. That's what we're going to pass. So like Veristyle there, you'll know it says it was built in 1810, but then had additional 1938, 1913, 1936, blah, blah, blah. You know, so it continued to people lived in that. Cover that history, I think that's a fascinating part of old houses, and you can kind of start to read that. See the oldest part here, that Greek revival style. Have the changes later on in the teens and on into the 30s. Lots of different styles. 1860s, Morris Butler House, our museum property. Styles change. Here, right, kind of classic revival style, mid downtown building. Another Queen Anne simple building, modern. My point in that shot is that it continues. 1940s buildings, modern buildings, ranches, etc. are still part of our history. I remember taking a Greyhound bus out of one of these kind of stations. They have one or two. It's actually the last one of its kind in the United States on Evansville, Indiana. So you can things that way. It's my building in South Bend. But I'll make a mention when you look at a building, you got to be kind of aware of your dates and history of your community. One time but twice. So that really throws you off when you're walking down the street. Maybe remember it being somewhere. So now use the hammer. Remember I mentioned you use hammers? If you're in rehab, if you're doing rehabilitation in your house, trying to restore what you uncover, restore. So here's what we had on the first floor. Yes, that's holding up the second floor. It's not for the faint of heart. But we can find, traces around the window of what the moldings look like. This whole wall was going shadow side over here. From that, we were able to trace out the size of the windows that were that out. Lucky for us, it worked out pretty well. We actually found the windows up in the attic, and when we installed them, they actually matched what we had drawn out. So sometimes you do get lucky and find those things upstairs in the attic. So we were able to put that as well. If you want to find, I can't get too deep into it today. These are a couple of books that I highly recommend. One is called A Field Guide to American by Virginia and Lee McAllister. It's kind of a Bible. It's a rule that helps people learn styles. One that's a little simpler. Pocket Guide is what style is. You can find it on any of the resellers online or those sorts of places. These guys. So these are really. Let's talk about styles. Just run through this. What kind of style? Log structure, right? So if you know about the time your community was settled, you have a log structure you find in the middle of your house, then you're going to be able to start saying, oh, I know Wabash was settled in X date, what, 1836?
It was official 1837 is when it was.
Bought me a year. That's good. Yeah. Wabash County, of course, people was an official area. So if you found this, you're uncovering something in the middle of your house, you come across a log structure. Somewhere around the 1800s, early 18 teens, 20s, 30s, and around that time frame is probably what that structure dated to in your community here. In South Bend, it may be a little bit later. So you have to know about the settlement pattern when you're looking at houses. That's helpful. So log structure is usually what the first building in. Pretty quick, they get shelter, and then often they would incorporate those as part of additions to houses. So you'll find these people find log structures in the middle of their houses. But very quickly, people started building more substantial houses. So like this federal bottom right, very simple federal style house, but people wanted to live in something substantial. So this one actually 1860, so a little bit later. The federal styles, if you find a Greek revival, probably around 1860, 1865. This one, if you recognize it's up in Elkhart County, across from the Elkhart County Courthouse, one of the we have anywhere in northern Indiana. 1860, great Greek revival front buildings. So yeah, that you can kind of date. Gothic revival, moving on to about the little 1860s, 1870s in Rochester, Indiana. If you drive around the countryside in Indiana, what do you find? Lots of houses often, right? Why is that? Well, really started to get heavily populated around the 1860s, 1870s. It was a popular style at the time. Lots of farmhouses got built in the Italian style. So if you drive around, you say, oh, look at that. This is an earlier farm. Maybe the first substantial house, probably about 1870, maybe a little bit earlier. This is Romanesque revival, unless you're a speed maker. Queen Anne. Why do I have this shot? This is also my historic car picture, by the way. If I can name the picture, I'll give you an extra star. But keep in mind when you're looking at houses, especially in neighborhoods, if you're not in a rural area, if you're in a neighborhood, people built the same way that they did today then. So they would buy a field, they would divide or plat that field, and they start building houses. They would the same house, but they would just change it a little bit. Does that sound familiar? If you've been to a new subdivision? Right, change the color of the door, it's a different house, right? Well, here you've got a Queen Anne instead of Queen Anne's. Like 1880, 1890 to 1910, so that helps you date. But notice, 1, 2, 3, they're all the same house. They just put a gable here, they put a turn, they changed the porch a little bit, but it's all the same floor plan. You walk in, if you're researching your old house. Well, I certainly would be knocking on my neighbor's door if I'm new to the neighborhood, saying, hey, can I be nosy? If you know the research their house, because these have all been built at the same time, so why would you go back and reinvent the wheel? Research. I am absolutely advocating for that. Or if you're trying to figure out, your house has been figure out the plan, I'd be nosy, I'd be looking at the houses up now, trying to figure out which one looked like mine, knocking on the door, hey, can I take a look at yours? Because it might give you some ideas, because oftentimes they were built by this. So just a hint, don't reinvent the wheel, be nosy, talk to your neighbors, figure out from your street. And yes, that's a Chevette, an old Chevy, and what is that? So lots of different styles. High styles is I would call that purebred style. It's got all the refinements, right? Kind of high-end style. Well, did everybody build a Queen Anne? Absolutely not. But did you build a simplified version of this if you weren't quite as rich? Absolutely. And so you could look at that on a turn, just be smaller, right, when they were built there. So 1880s, 1890s. And different sizes and forms. Anybody guess the style? Usually people here. Very, kind of sticks out, right? Maybe this. Now the thing about Prairie that I like to point out with why these houses were so unique and still are today is that you see the house to the right in the shot, the blue one sticking up there? Well, that's also contemporarily being built at the same time that they were building these prairie style houses. So I would have loved to be able to fly when they started to build this prairie style house. I had just built my Queen Anne, 5 years ago. I'm sure there was some conversation in that neighborhood. So context is always important. This house is maybe 10 to 15 years older than this one, not much. You'd think it'd be a lot bigger. So prairie. Did everybody build a prairie house from that period? No, they certainly saw that as a style. Maybe they put wide eaves on that, like that, so you can start to get some ideas. Very simple houses like this 4-square from the 1920s. Different types of size of a 4-square. Well, of course, 4 rooms down and 4 rooms. You don't have to be very creative. No, of course not. Makes it easy. Anybody live in a 4-square? Pretty functional house, right? You got the house, got the in the middle, very livable house. Lots of these were built in teens and 20s. Different styles, different phases. Sometimes you get lucky though, and you have a pattern house. Sears, Roebuck, Aladdin, etc., etc. Go on and on. So if you think that, just be aware. You can find that were built by catalogs. This one happens to be the Sears and Roebuck house. This one's in LaPorte, Indiana. You can have a catalog, find the actual, and there it is. That's easy to make your house that way, right? Styles, you don't have a lot of these. Tudor, probably around here in the 20s and 30s. Deco houses. What does this house remind you of? Travel-wise in the 20s. Like a Titanic, right there. So you got the middle, you got the portal windows. Anybody ever lived in one of these? All metal? Absolutely. 3,000 pieces came to the site in the back of a truck. You can put them together with 3 tools, a mallet and a crescent wrench, and you put them together. Houses. It's a whole other talk. So now we're kind of coming into the post-war though. So if you see this restaurant, it's going to 48 post-war housing, that period of time, we start to date that. Now this always makes people cringe. They're like, why are you showing me pictures of ranch houses? Well, ranch is historic. Generally it's 50 years old or older, so if you do the math, we're into the 1960s now. I retire when I have to preserve my first, becoming increasingly too close to me. Just like the Queen Anne's and the Decos and all these styles I've shown you, ranches are a specific period. They were in vogue at a specific time, and they are absolutely the in thing right now in areas for preservation. Century architecture is the current kind of wave in historic preservation, and so ranches from the 60s, ones like this one, are currently in vogue. So just different styles, and they come back around. 19th century revivals. I showed you quickly a Gothic revival in the 60s. This house is actually from about 2000, a revival of a revival. What's the difference? Gothic revivals, original ones, are much smaller, and everything in life gets bigger, doesn't it? So in our houses, they get bigger as well. And a revival federal style, a row house that I found being constructed. So that's just a quick primer on styles. And just be your house style guides, you can find these books. Attempt to verify any alleged claims to the neighbor and say, oh yeah, this house, or the Underground Railroad came through here. on your little research. Okay, thank you. But verify that. You know, trust and verify. If your house was built in 1920, it probably was not on the railroad. Just a hint. Laugh, but I've had people call me, I live in such and such a house, it's on the Underground Railroad. Okay. So, enough on that. So just finishing up on that, look at this house, probably the house around your neighborhood, just be aware. Because the houses will tell you their story. You'll be able to see when the early ones were built, see the Queen Anne's coming in. Or you'll see when the Joneses caught up with the housing style. I'll show you a couple examples. But be careful, sometimes things around it. A lot of houses were moved very early. They didn't have electrical wires like we do today, so it's actually easier to move houses. So that this Griever house was actually moved there. It's in the same neighborhood as that Tudor, right? The same moldings, can't get into all the details, but just like side styles, moldings changed over time, or wall paint, or flooring. All those things are clues because people put in their house what was popular at the time. And if you pay attention to that, it will give you their styles. So as far as is concerned, comes into my hammer. If you're doing and you're into researching your house, pay attention to what it tells you, because you can read also materials or construction. You can read your if it's a hand wrought 2x4, it's very early, right? They didn't have the sawmills in place, or it's very regular, then it's going to be a little bit later. Same thing with lath and plaster. Who knew lath and plaster could talk to you? So up here we have example. They basically had a sheet of wood, and they took their axe and they split it, and then they raised it, they separated it from their plaster. So this, we're looking at the back of the wall, the plaster through, and that's how you hold it on. So you like this, where it's not very regular, it's very early, mid-19th century probably, settlement. Then they get into this cut, doing rather, yeah, people criticize sawmills, mass-produced, so much later period. Anybody dealt with this stuff, this lath? Consider yourself lucky. So you got into the 1920s, 30s, on into the dealt with this lath. So they moved on. And this is tenacious. It does its job very well. So these are just different ways that people would use to get lath. They can give you an idea of when these were made. I like this shot because what's happened here? Board back there, right? What happened? Well, somebody just built the wall right in front of it. Who knows why? That wall, and behind there is the original baseboard. Well, maybe you're restoring your house. You don't even know what it looked like. You might find a little scrap of it back in the corner somewhere. You just never know. So you can use that information to help date your house and just keep track of the changes that we'll talk to. You do a case study in this. You look at this house. Anything kind of jump out at you at this house by just looking at it? Look at the front and look kind of towards the back. What's different about different parts of the house? They're facing different directions, absolutely. So that's a change, right? Or why would you wouldn't necessarily build it that way? The front's like a lot taller, isn't it? Massing. So the front of it's like really tall compared to that back part. Would you build a house that way? Not necessarily. So that's kind of curious. So you got this tall part here, and then you got this little bay window. I was always curious about this house. You look inside, it really starts to jump out at you, doesn't it? Like got this middle section, and then you got this addition to the front, and then they moved this little wing on the back. It's a very curious house. I'm always puzzled by this house. I was wondering, well, we got into construction. What did we find? A log structure. Well, if you go back, the log structure was right here, the first house. Then they added the second story. We found that out by looking around the inside as the construction was going on. About 1910, they added this entire wing on the front, and then they moved the summer house back here up to the south end. So that's just looking at the house. So we knew about the time the area was being settled. So we could date that back to 1850. We knew when they transferred ownership. When did we make our houses? We buy them, right? Transferred about 1900 and 1910. Well, what do you know? That's about the same period of time style in the front. So you got lots of different things that we kept that open just to show you what it ended up looking like. This is actually an education center for a preschool, and they tell the story of this house by kids inside and telling them about how they used wood to build houses and that sort of thing. So you can do a lot of that. For example, I'll just show you a tile. So you got kind of a tile red brick house here. See the pipe? a time it freeze up in there, but about 1880, this neighborhood became very Victorian. They built a lot of houses, so they wanted to keep up. They put a new roof on it, they put a different roof in front of this house, and they changed out the stair. By looking at the style, here's your Italian style stairway, here's your mention this as well, so just pay attention. You can do the wall, flooring, all these things will tell you the story. Is this how you feel right now? Who is this? You all should know this. I actually, this is one of when you know you're getting too old to be doing these sorts of things. Like I gave this image and the kids had no idea they weren't from this period. I'm like, well, you need to, yes, whatever. This is a photo of you feeling overwhelmed. My wife, when I told her that she'd be alone with the kids in a meeting, no, could be. Popular character from the 90s movie, you got that one right. Or owner after 6 months, you're finished. They're like, company, right? That was the name of the movie. Find somebody who has researched their house. I mentioned this. If their neighbor has done that, if you know somebody that's society, folks here at the county records, is familiar with the source, go find that. Somebody else has done it in their town. See something in your community. They know the material, so don't try and do it on your own. The staff in the plat room and the recorder, they know their stuff. They're there every day. They know their books. They know what are and where are the ins and outs. So if you kind of have a sense of that, your address, your key number, they can help you. Now be respectful. Don't just show up and expect them to drop and help you research their house. Usually if you make it up, they're glad to help you out. They know their books. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. There's people that are out there that can help you do that, and they'll help you figure that out. Some obvious places that you might check when you kind of want to do more of the traditional research method. The National Register of Historic Places maintain an online presence now. They're slowly populating the National Register nomination in the United States. Does that matter to you? Well, if you live in a house that's already listed on the National Register, either by itself or as part of a district, a lot of research has probably been done on that property. So you might want to just check with somebody locally who might know if it already is listed or not. So that's a great look online. If it's not there, check out with the Historical Society or your local sources. You can call us up and we can tell you for sure. No reason to read it's already been done. So check the obvious places. The National Register is one of those. Wabash, downtowns on the National Register. You've got some residential areas that are on the National Register. So there may be an opportunity for another obvious location, and I grabbed the wrong one. I was in the W's and I said Wabash, but oh well. There are county surveys. Do you have one of these surveys here in this for Wabash? There should be around you. You haven't seen it. Okay. There is a survey of all counties in Indiana where the historical places are. At least it's a high level. Why does it matter to you? Well, so what you have in these surveys, generally, you're going to have an approximate. This is a shot of the book. You're going to have an approximate date of the house. It's by address. The map in the book where your house might be located at that street. It's going to have an approximate historic name if they happen to know at the time. It's going to have a potential style and information about it. So it's kind of a windshield survey, just a high level, but it's a great place to start. It's going to give you some approximate you might be looking at. So grab a copy of the Wabash County survey. It's here in the library as well. So check that out as well. Naturally, this is just one example. I'm sure that all of you who have abstracts only wear white gloves when you have yours out, right? Again, what an abstract is, if you can find it for your property, your time, because it will just record every transaction related to the transfer of that property, a mortgage on the property, etc. Why would mortgages be helpful for you? Why would a mortgage tell you the history of your house? What happens when it buys a piece of property? They might have cash to build their house, but just like us, they would borrow, or to buy. So you maybe find a transfer, you find a name, the property was transferred, or maybe when somebody took out a mortgage, that might give you the date of the house. Normally a jump in a mortgage is going to say, oh, something went there, generally. So it's a great source if you have them. If you have your you sell it, I will come back and find you. It needs to stay with the house. Take a copy of it because it needs to stay there. It's an example of one of those records in a this one happens to be a mortgage to Christopher Peppard. This one happens to have a release, so he paid it off. Good for him. $1,500 mortgage. Wouldn't that be awesome? Wow. Government records. Where are some other areas you might look at in government records? At the county courthouse or government center, that's where your deed books are going to be located. That's where your records are going to be located, that sorts of thing. Your city hall, etc. Make sure you have your legal description, because that may be one area that you're going to trace back. Any more? What happens? We went to computerized records. We went to called title insurance. Right? Anybody bought a property insurance? Don't go as deep into that research on your title insurance as they used to with abstracts. That's when they disappeared. So your county recorder is a huge help. And again, your computer. I was trying to get to the county records, your deed books. So, remember, if you're in your grantee, buyer, grantor is seller, mortgagee, mortgagor. It tracks, okay? G, mortgagor. So, grantee is the person buying the property, grantor is the person selling. Why does that matter to you? Well, that's how you start to track back names. If you've got a name to start with, if you can get into your county deed records, you can track that name forwards. So finding a name somewhere in those deed records, find out who's owned that property, before you or person or person, depending on when you're starting. So it's a place to start. So that's always helpful, right? So if you have one name to start with, that's a great place to go. So those are where you spend time learning how to read old-fashioned cursive writing. You can do that if you do this long enough, but at first you're like, oh, how do I read this? So that's really key. Well, how do you find a name? Maybe it's write it on your transfer paperwork somewhere back when you're looking into his house. Or maybe you knew such and such lived in that house because of family history. Once you can go forward or backwards into those deed books and really start to create that record of ownership. What are plat books? Wabash, wherever, right? It was at one time or had to take that space and plat it and tell the county, okay, I'm going to build my roads here, I'm going to build my houses here, and that date. So you can get into those plat books and you can look at those maps, and it'll help you date maybe when the house was built. It's just another way to reference dates, because they'll have a date plat, right? If it's a neighborhood. Now, if you're in a rural area, it's much more difficult. You have to get into county. So I'm mostly referring to in-town spaces, whether it's Wabash, or wherever you're at. So plat books are various plats of where the city, when they were created, neighborhoods were built. And they look, a variety of ways, and most of them always have scotch tape on the bottom, like this one does. All of our history people. But plat books are a great way to figure out when the neighborhood was first built. Most of the time, your house is going to be about that period, unless it's the first house, like a farmhouse, adjacent neighborhood. So it's a great way to look at that. Who are the best people to help me with plat books? The people that look at them every day, because they can help you figure out about when that was. Anybody ever use sandboard maps? Back. Like you must be the great researcher in the room today. Sandboard maps. What are sandboard maps? Sandboard was a fire company, and they paid people to go around and make maps of communities where they had insurance. Why does that help you if it's? Well, they would go back and they'd update those maps. So a map of the neighborhood. They have all the houses, all the buildings that were built. Also, the key on those sandboard maps, the colors indicate the type of material the building was built out of, whether it was wood or brick. Or to a fire insurance company. Well, they want to know if they're the only wood house in the middle of a smokestack-laden industry, right? That's a problem. Or if it's the only brick house and it's all wood. So sandboards are great. Get dates when that house shows up on the map or approximate. Give you built out of. And you'll see what neighborhoods around it were constructed. So sandboard maps, if you go online, just type in sandboard, they're mostly online now. You have some here at the library. If you have some here in the historical society, you can actually pay to flip through and then do them here. They're great to look at and really give you a lot of information, because some poor guys that would stand out there with they actually stand outside the house. These are those little houses. And back and then sketch maybe if there was an addition built. Showed up or when it disappeared. So a great resource, those maps, sandboard maps. Country, it's a little more difficult resource. You have to go to county atlases because they didn't have sandboard maps for the county. They just didn't do it. Plat maps, so you have to kind of get into different types of layers of information. Those are great. I love these images that are in these county atlases. They're always how shall I say, I always suspect they were probably a little ran and they really were. You know, that's just a suspicion. But people would get their houses put in a picture of your house. Cards are another tool you can use. Cards. Well, the assessment, you're looking back through the assessor's cards, the assessment jumps, right? Well, it's empty land, or then there's a house. Another date you can. And I always use assessor's cards, because sometimes they're right on, sometimes they're not, but they're a good place. Microfiche, another thing, if you're a researcher, it makes me dizzy, I fall off the chair. Microfiche are just a way that people hurts them all these little, you just scan through them, right? You get dizzy and you fall off the chair. Other sources, and this is where like she starts with house research, right? Some of the same sources are used. Old that are no longer location are great, especially early house or neighborhood mention of that in the newspaper. You know, John Rush platted to build, or so and so built their house. Longtime neighborhood residents love that. But verify people what they are, you know. So just verify resource of information, maybe who lived in your house, who moved, changes made. They'll say, oh yeah, I remember when they changed the porch. Why would obituaries help you in house research? Certainly for genealogy, house research. Any guesses on that? Go ahead.
Because if they died in the home, it would mention home location. Sometimes it would say in the residence of the.
Perfect. If the obituaries of old were awesome. Obituaries of today. So I really sorry for future research. Those obits were great. They would list where they lived. They maybe list, you know, what they did for a living. Blah. They would also list survivors. If Ma Kettle was the last person to live at the house and she had four daughters, one of those daughters probably there to the house, or some estate was created that went to auction. So you can use that name around that time frame in the deed books. Did it transfer to Ma's daughter Beth or somebody else? So that can help you put the chain back together at a gap. So people don't think about obituaries at some point because somebody died usually, right? So obituaries can help you, or genealogy later in. Histories, of course, census records are really fun and more online. I think we're up to what, 1940 or something like that now. They just released a new one. I went online, found where I live. I'm the fourth generation, so I was able to find the census in 1943 and saw my grandfather had farmed and my grandmother lived there. My mom, my dad, and his sisters. It was great. It's like looking right in. It's like you're right there. Look back. So census records are another way you can kind of cross-reference somebody. Your census cross-reference that. There's no one, as I started out, it'd be great to look it up. Oh, there it is. But you're cross-referencing when you're doing research. If you find a bit of information, you're right, but you want to cross-reference that to really get history. And hopefully you don't hit that. But if you, what do you do? Well, you ask a question, right? And as you come down to the historical site and say, oh, I look like I'm about done. Or you go down to your plat room and say, you know, is there a plat for my neighborhood? The deed book and say, oh, I know Jones lived here such and such a day. Can you help me find where those deeds are in your books? Cross-reference all that. That's what you first started with, right? Look at the style house, you know, it's about mid-19th century. Starts to layer in kind of. So that's what I wanted to cover with you. That you wanted to learn about that today, or if you have a question that answer, yes.
You skip.
I don't know every town I'm in who has what, so that's why I did. Do you have city directories here? If you maybe you tell them.
We have a 1883 business that lists downtown businesses. Then it jumps to 8 and then goes current.
Directories are like the phone books of their time, steroids. So they will list who lived in the property, maybe a business association. So like the have city directories for that year, you can track that who lived in that property. The difference is who lived in it, not who owned it. So you able to figure out, and then all of a sudden in World War II or cross-reference it with your deed, always the names of the owners. So,
Plus, prior to 1910, the address was Wabash.
exactly,
So-
yeah. So this is a perfect example of people that know kind of at a level that is, find the folks like yourself in the room, know your town. Change, addresses change, houses move around, it's crazy. But yeah, absolutely. Knowing those dates will help. Absolutely. So
This is
I-
the archivist. Yeah.
What's your name?
I'm Heather.
I'm just going to call Heather. But you know what? In every town, there is a knows your material. Find them. It'll help you. Other questions or comments I missed?
There were some bullet points that talked about cutoff at the year 19.
Yeah, in 10. That's why I went past every time. I have to change that slide because it's 14. This town, it sounds like it's 19. So knowing your resources when those things change will help you off on a tangent somewhere. Yeah. Paying attention. Well, let me give you a copy of our magazine. If you want to come up afterwards, I've got guides. I've got a couple of publications on researching. You might want to take. I didn't know how many today. Great. One for you too. So I've got a couple different guides. One deals with styles. One deals with more of the book research type of thing. Go from there. So, any other questions?
Can we get a email you?
Yeah, I'll give you my card and